The air in Terminal 4 of JFK was a familiar symphony of chaos. A frantic mixture of rolling suitcases, garbled announcements, and the low hum of collective anxiety. For most, it was a stressful gauntlet to be endured. But for Dr. Celeste Marigny, it was a moment of quiet decompression. She was an island of calm in a sea of hurry. Dressed in a simple but elegant graphite-colored cashmere travel suit, she held a worn copy of a book on quantum computing, its pages filled with her own annotations. No one would guess that the woman blending so seamlessly into the crowd had just closed a multi-billion-dollar acquisition that would reshape the landscape of satellite communications. And no one, especially not the gate agent for Aurafly Flight 815 to London, could possibly know that Dr. Marigny's last major investment had been saving this very airline from bankruptcy. The gate area for Aurafly Flight 815 was a microcosm of society. The economy passengers formed a long, snaking line, their faces etched with a weary resignation. The priority boarding lane was shorter, a collection of business travelers in sharp suits, their fingers still tapping away on laptops and phones, squeezing out the last drops of productivity before takeoff. Dr. Celeste Marigny stood near the front of the first-class line, designated by a plush navy rope. She was absorbed in her book, finding solace in the elegant logic of qubit states after 3 days of brutal round-the-clock negotiations. The deal was done. Her company Nexus Orbital had acquired a key competitor, and now all she wanted was the quiet solitude of her first-class suite, a glass of champagne, and the 7-hour flight to decompress before meeting her London-based engineering team. The gate agent, a woman whose name tag read Sharon, exuded an aura of sour dissatisfaction. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her lips were set in a thin, permanent line of disapproval. She moved with a clipped, aggressive efficiency, snatching passports and scanning boarding passes as if each passenger were a personal imposition. Celeste watched her for a moment. She'd seen this type before. The employee who felt trapped wielding the tiny sliver of authority their job afforded them, like a weapon against a world they felt had wronged them. Celeste had made her fortune by understanding systems both computational and human. She knew that Sharon was a symptom of a larger problem, likely poor management, low morale, or inadequate training. It was a data point she filed away mentally. Her investment in Aurafly wasn't just financial. She was on the board and genuinely wanted to see it become the best in the industry. First-class passengers you may now board at your leisure. Sharon's voice crackled over the PA system, devoid of any warmth. A well-dressed man in front of Celeste, a Mr. Thompson, according to the brief, friendly exchange they'd had, stepped forward. Sharon gave him a smile that was a brief, almost painful-looking contortion of her facial muscles. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson. Have a wonderful flight." He nodded and passed through. Celeste stepped up next, placing her passport and first-class boarding pass on the counter. She offered a small, polite smile. "Good evening." Sharon didn't look up immediately. She finished typing something into her computer, the clacking of the keys unnecessarily loud. Finally, she glanced at Celeste's documents, then up at Celeste herself. Her eyes, a flat shade of grey, raked over Celeste from head to toe. It wasn't a glance. It was an assessment, a judgment. Celeste's simple cashmere suit, her natural hair styled in elegant locks, and her minimal makeup clearly didn't fit Sharon's mental image of a first-class passenger. The forced smile vanished, replaced by a cold professional mask. "Passport," she said, her tone clipped. Celeste gently pushed the document forward. It's right there. Sharon picked it up as if it were contaminated. She scanned the photo, then stared hard at Celeste's face, holding the passport up next to it for an uncomfortably long time. "Is there a problem?" Celeste asked, her voice calm and even. "Just need to verify," Sharon muttered, her eyes darting back to her screen. She typed in Celeste's information with deliberate, slow keystrokes. A small, almost imperceptible frown creased her brow. Everything was clearly in order, but that fact seemed to displease her. She then picked up the boarding pass. She ran it under the scanner. It beeped affirmatively. A green light flashed. Still, Sharon did not move. She stared at the screen, then at the ticket, then back at Celeste. "This is an unusual ticket," she said, her voice laced with suspicion. Celeste's brow furrowed slightly. "Unusual how?" "It was booked through our corporate travel division." She purposefully used the word "our," a small test. It sailed right over Sharon's head. "It's a Z-class fare, fully flexible, booked less than 12 hours ago, and it was expensive." She said the last word as if it were an accusation. Celeste felt a flicker of annoyance, but she kept her composure. "Yes, it was a last-minute booking. My meetings in New York ran longer than expected." Sharon tapped the boarding pass on the counter. "And you're in Suite 1A, the flagship suite." She looked around as if searching for someone else, the real passenger for Suite 1A. "Sometimes there are mix-ups. People get hold of tickets that don't belong to them." The implication was as clear as it was offensive. The subtle chill had become a palpable frost. Other passengers in the line were beginning to stare, their curiosity piqued by the delay. "I can assure you that ticket belongs to me," Celeste said, her voice dropping a half-octave, acquiring a new layer of firmness. "My name is Dr. Celeste Marigny. It's on the passport and it's on the ticket. They match, the ticket scanned correctly. May I please board the plane?" Sharon leaned forward, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial, condescending whisper. "Look, I'm just trying to save you some embarrassment. We have procedures for a reason. I need to see the credit card that was used to purchase this ticket." This was a clear breach of protocol. Once a ticket was issued and a passenger's identity verified against their government-issued ID, such a request was baseless, especially for a ticket booked through a major corporate account. Celeste knew this. Sharon knew this. And Sharon knew that Celeste likely knew this. It wasn't about procedure. It was about power. "That's not standard procedure," Celeste stated calmly. "The ticket was purchased through the Nexus Orbital corporate account, which is on file with this airline. You don't need to see a physical card. For a purchase of this magnitude, flagged as last minute, I do." Sharon insisted, her chin jutting out. "It's for your protection, you see. Against fraud." The line behind Celeste was growing longer. A young man with a phone in his hand, a Mr. Daniel Chen, according to his boarding pass, looked on with a concerned expression. The theater of it all was beginning to take shape. Celeste took a slow, deliberate breath. She was a problem solver. This was just another problem. A flawed human algorithm executing a biased script. She could play along, or she could challenge it. For now, she chose the path of least resistance. "Fine," she said, reaching into her designer leather tote. "Though I will be lodging a formal complaint about this verification process. It seems highly irregular." She produced her wallet and laid the Nexus Orbital corporate black card on the counter. It was heavy, made of anodized metal, and bore her name in embossed letters. Dr. Celeste Marigny. Sharon's eyes flickered with a strange mix of disappointment and resentment. The card was undeniably real, undeniably premium. It was a tangible symbol of a world she served, but could never join. For a moment, Celeste thought the charade was over. But Sharon wasn't done. She pushed the card back towards Celeste. "I'm sorry," she said, the insincerity dripping from her words. "The system is still flagging this as a potential security risk. I can't let you board." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering with malice. "I can't let you board." A ripple of murmurs went through the line. The other passengers who had been trying to mind their own business were now fully invested. This was no longer a simple ticketing issue. It was a public confrontation. Celeste stared at Sharon, her composure a mask of reinforced steel over a core of rising fury. She had faced down hostile corporate raiders, skeptical venture capitalists, and condescending academics her entire career. She had learned to channel her anger into a focused, unshakable resolve. "On what grounds?" Celeste asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "You have my passport. You have my valid boarding pass. You have the credit card that purchased the ticket even though you had no right to ask for it. State the precise regulation you are citing for denying me boarding." She was speaking the language of liability and corporate procedure. It was a direct challenge to Sharon's authority, demanding a justification that could be scrutinized later. Sharon's face flushed a blotchy red. She was being cornered, and it made her more aggressive. "It's a security issue. The system has flagged it. I don't have to explain the inner workings of our security software to you. It's for the safety of everyone on board. So you're telling me that your computer system has flagged me a person with a confirmed identity and a valid ticket as a security risk, a potential threat." Celeste let the words hang in the air, ensuring everyone heard the absurdity of the claim. The young man behind her, Daniel Chen, now had his phone angled slightly downwards, the small red light of a recording blinking discreetly. He was a junior associate at a law firm, and every instinct in his body was screaming that what he was witnessing was not just unprofessional, but illegal. "I'm not saying you're a threat," Sharon backpedaled, realizing her misstep. "I'm saying the transaction is a risk. These high-value, last-minute tickets are often purchased with stolen information. You people..." She stopped, but the words were already out. "You people." The air turned electric. The coded language had become an overt siren. It was a phrase loaded with a long, ugly history, designed to categorize and diminish. Celeste's expression didn't change, but a cold fire ignited in her eyes. "You people," Celeste repeated, her voice soft, but carrying across the now silent gate area. "Please, Sharon, enlighten me. Which people precisely are you referring to?" Sharon flinched, realizing the gravity of her slip. She tried to recover, stammering, "People. People who try to scam the system. That's all I meant. It's my job to protect the airline. Your job is to facilitate the boarding of ticketed passengers." Celeste corrected her, her voice like ice. "And you are failing at it, spectacularly. You are discriminating against me based on a prejudice you hold about what a first-class passenger should look like. Now I will ask you one last time. Scan my boarding pass and let me on this plane." Sharon now backed into a corner of her own making, doubled down. Humiliation was a powerful motivator, and she was not about to be proven wrong in front of her audience. "No," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "I'm not letting you on this plane. My supervisor will back me up on this. We have a zero-tolerance policy for fraudulent activity." She reached for the intercom button on her desk phone. "This is a final boarding call for Aura Fly Flight 8159 to London. All remaining passengers, please proceed to the gate." It was a deliberate act of dismissal, an attempt to render Celeste invisible. She was now not just a problem, but an obstruction. "You are making a monumental mistake," Celeste said, her voice a low warning. "The only mistake was you thinking this would work." Sharon retorted, her confidence surging as she felt she was winning the standoff. "Now please step aside. You're holding up the line." The business class passengers began to shuffle forward, uncertain of the etiquette in such a situation. Most avoided eye contact with Celeste, their discomfort palpable. One older woman in a pearl necklace shot Celeste a look of pure pity, as if she were a vagrant who had wandered into the wrong part of town. But Daniel Chen held his ground. "This is outrageous," he said, stepping forward slightly. "I've been standing right here. This woman has done nothing wrong. She has presented valid documentation. You have no right to deny her boarding." Sharon turned her venom on him. "Sir, this does not concern you. Step back, or I'll have you removed for interfering with a security procedure." "What security procedure?" Daniel shot back. "The one where you get to harass a black woman because you can't believe she belongs in first class." The accusation was now out in the open, raw and undeniable. Sharon's face went white with fury. "That's it," she snapped. "I'm calling the manager." She stabbed a button on her phone. "Robert, I have a situation at gate C28. A passenger is refusing to accept a verification denial. Yes, a possible fraud case. She's becoming aggressive." Celeste listened to the calculated lies, her mind working like a supercomputer. She had given Sharon every chance to de-escalate, to follow the rules, to simply do her job. That path was now closed. The system had failed at its first point of contact. Now it was time to test the next level. She needed to see how deep the rot went. She stepped back from the counter, a picture of tranquility, and crossed her arms. She ignored the stares and whispers from the other passengers. Her focus was entirely on the approaching figure of the gate manager, a man who had no idea he was walking into the most consequential moment of his career. The problem was no longer about getting on the plane. It was about what she would do with the airline she partly owned when one of its own employees behaved like this. The stakes had just gotten infinitely higher. Robert Peterson, the duty manager for Terminal C, arrived with the puffed-up self-importance of a man whose authority was rarely challenged. He was in his late 40s with a receding hairline he tried to hide by combing his hair forward, and a physique that spoke of a sedentary life and too many airport food court meals. He saw the crowd at the gate, the bottleneck of business-class passengers, and his expression soured. Delays meant paperwork, and paperwork was the bane of his existence. He strode up to the counter, completely ignoring Celeste, and addressed Sharon directly. "What's the problem here, Sharon? We need to get this flight out." "This woman," Sharon began gesturing dismissively toward Celeste, "is holding a ticket for Suite 1A that flagged in the system. A last-minute Z-Class booking. I asked for secondary verification per protocol for high-risk transactions, and she refused to cooperate." She became belligerent. Celeste listened to the cascade of falsehoods without blinking. Refused to cooperate. Belligerent. She had been a model of restraint. Robert, however, accepted his employee's version of events without question. It was the easiest path. He finally turned to Celeste, his gaze impatient and condescending. "Ma'am, we have procedures here. If the system flags something, we have to follow up. It's for everyone's safety. Now, if you could just step aside, we can sort this out after the flight has departed." "After the flight has departed," Celeste repeated, her voice dangerously level. "You want me to miss my flight Because your employee has a personal issue with my presence in the first-class line. Robert's face hardened. He was not used to being questioned. Sharon is a senior agent. She knows the protocols. If she says there's a risk, I have to trust her judgment. He looked from Celeste's calm face to Sharon's agitated one, and made the calculation that backing his employee was the path of least resistance. Her judgment is flawed, and her protocol is imaginary, Celeste stated. I showed her my passport, my boarding pass, and the credit card used for the purchase, which she had no authority to request. Ask her. Ask to see the official written or-a-fly regulation that gives a gate agent the right to deny boarding to a passenger with a valid ticket and a confirmed identity under these circumstances. Robert was taken aback by her articulate and precise rebuttal. This was not the typical irate passenger he was used to dealing with. He glanced at Sharon, a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Sharon saw it and jumped in. She's trying to twist things, Robert. She was very rude, and when I mentioned security, she and that man. She pointed a trembling finger at Daniel Chen, accused me of being a racist. The word hung in the air like a toxin. For a manager like Robert, it was a dreaded keyword one that meant HR meetings, incident reports, and potential legal trouble. His instinct was to shut it down hard and fast. Is that true? He asked Celeste, his tone now accusatory. Did you make that accusation? I asked her to clarify what she meant by the term you people, Celeste corrected him calmly. Her colleague here merely pointed out the obvious implication. The fact remains that she has provided no legitimate reason to deny me access to a service I have paid for. You as her manager are now complicit in this. Robert's face tightened. Ma'am, I'm not going to stand here and be lectured. You are causing a disturbance. The captain has been notified of a security issue at the gate, and he won't proceed with boarding until it's resolved. You are delaying a flight with 200 passengers on it. He was turning the crowd against her, a classic tactic. A few frustrated sighs rippled through the line. The only person causing a disturbance and a delay is your agent Celeste, said her patience finally wearing thin. I will not be placated, I will not be dismissed, and I will certainly not sort this out after the flight has departed. You have two options. You can instruct your agent to scan my boarding pass and allow me to board the plane I am ticketed for, or you can continue down this path, in which case I promise you the delay of Flight 815 will be the very least of Aurafly's problems this evening. The sheer, unadulterated confidence with which she spoke gave Robert pause. There was no hysteria in her voice, no desperate pleading. It was a statement of fact delivered with the chilling certainty of a CEO announcing quarterly losses. For a split second, he felt a prickle of fear. Who was this woman? But that moment of doubt was quickly crushed by years of bureaucratic inertia and managerial ego. He couldn't back down now. It would mean admitting his employee was wrong, that he was wrong. It would mean losing face. That sounds like a threat, ma'am, he said, puffing out his chest. And we don't respond to threats. I'm giving you a final chance. Step away from the gate. We can rebook you on a flight tomorrow morning, and we can discuss this then. I don't want to be rebooked. I want to take my seat on this flight. Seat 1A. Celeste insisted, her voice unwavering. That's not going to happen, Robert said with finality. He turned to a nearby airport security officer who had been observing the commotion. Officer, could you please escort this woman away from the boarding area? She's being disruptive. The officer, a large man with a weary face, approached slowly. Ma'am, you heard the manager. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. This was the final escalation, from suspicion to accusation to public humiliation, and now the threat of physical removal. Celeste had seen the entire system from the front line to middle management fail utterly. It was rotten. She gave a small, almost sad shake of her head. She looked at Robert, then at Sharon, who was now watching with a triumphant smirk. "You've made your choice," Celeste said softly. She held up a hand to the security officer, a gesture that was not defensive but commanding. "That won't be necessary, officer. Just give me one moment." She turned away from them all, presenting her back to the counter in a gesture of final dismissal. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out her smartphone. The onlookers assumed she was calling a lawyer or perhaps her husband. Sharon rolled her eyes, whispering to Robert, "Here we go. She's calling someone to complain." Celeste ignored them. Her thumb moved swiftly across the screen, selecting a single name from her favorites list, a simple entry marked David. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear. It rang only once before it was answered. "David," she said, her voice completely changed. It was no longer the voice of a frustrated passenger. It was the voice of a commander, a partner, an equal. "It's Celeste. I'm at JFK Terminal C Gate 28. "Yes, your airline. I seem to be having a problem boarding Flight 8 from Fine. A rather significant one." She listened for a moment, a faint, mirthless smile touching her lips. "Oh, I think you'll want to handle this one personally, and I'd advise you to get here very, very quickly." Robert Peterson watched Celeste on her phone with a mixture of pity and annoyance. It was a common sight, the irate passenger making a dramatic, impotent call to someone they thought could fix their problem. He'd seen people pretend to call their lawyers, their senators, even the president. It was all hollow posturing. "Probably calling her boyfriend to come pick her up," Sharon whispered to him, a smug grin plastered on her face. The business class passengers were now being rerouted to a different scanner to get them on board, grumbling about the delay. "Let her have her moment," Robert said, trying to project an air of control. "The officer will deal with her when she's done." But Celeste's demeanor on the call was unsettling. There was no shouting, no pleading. Her conversation was short, precise, and spoken with an unnerving level of authority. She listened more than she spoke, nodding occasionally as if receiving a status report. "No, they're still here," she said into the phone, her eyes flicking over to Robert and Sharon. "The duty manager's name is Robert Peterson. The gate agent is Sharon Pickett. Yes, Sharon. Correct. I'll be waiting." She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her bag. She then turned her expression unreadable and looked directly at Robert. "He's on his way," she said simply. "Good for you, Robert," scoffed. "Now, if you don't mind, the security officer is waiting." He was cut off by the frantic buzzing of his own phone clipped to his belt. He pulled it out, annoyed by the interruption. He didn't recognize the number, but the exchange was from corporate headquarters. He sighed and answered it. "This is Peterson." The voice on the other end was not calm. It was panicked, high-pitched, and belonged to his direct superior, the Director of North American Airport Operations. "Robert, what in God's name is happening at C-28? The voice shrieked. Robert was stunned into silence for a second. Sir, we just had a minor security issue. A passenger with a flagged ticket. I'm handling it. You're handling it." The director yelled, his voice cracking with stress. The entire executive board just lit up. "I got a call directly from David Powell's office. He's on his way to your location. Do you have any idea who you just denied boarding to?" Robert's blood ran cold. David Powell, the CEO, the almost mythical figure who had taken over Aurafly a year ago and was orchestrating its massive, painful but ultimately successful turnaround. David Powell did not visit boarding gates. David Powell did not get involved in passenger disputes. "Sir, I don't understand. The passenger, the director cut him off, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper, "is Dr. Celeste Marigny. Does that name mean anything to you?" Robert's mind raced. Marigny. He'd heard the name. It was in the big corporate memo that went out 6 months ago, the one about the new capital investment. The memo about the private equity firm, Helios Capital Partners, that had essentially saved the airline from liquidation. The firm was run by a notoriously private genius-level tech billionaire who had made a fortune in orbital communications. The founder was... His eyes shot over to Celeste, who was now standing perfectly still, watching him, her gaze penetrating. The elegant but simple travel suit, the book on quantum computing, the utter, unshakable calm. It all clicked into place with a nauseating thud. Oh no. "Robert, are you still there?" the director screamed into the phone. "Dr. Marigny isn't just an investor. She's the managing partner of Helios. She owns 48% of this airline. She's David's partner. She is, for all intents and purposes, your boss's boss's boss." The phone slipped from Robert's nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty grey mask of pure terror. He looked at Celeste, not as a passenger, but as a deity who had just passed judgment on his entire existence. Sharon, who couldn't hear the call, looked at him with confusion. "Robert, what is it? What's wrong?" He didn't answer. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His mind was a maelstrom of regret and panic. The condescending tone he'd used, the threats, the dismissal. He had called security on the co-owner of the company. His trance was broken by a new sound. A set of automatic doors at the end of the concourse slid open, and a group of people began moving towards them at a pace that was just short of a full run. In the lead was a tall, silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit, his face a thundercloud of fury. It was a face Robert had only ever seen on the cover of Forbes and in corporate training videos. David Powell, the CEO of Airline Airlines, had arrived, and he did not look happy. Flanked by the head of airport operations and 2 imposing members of his executive security team, David moved with the focused intensity of a predator. The remaining passengers in the gate area parted before him like the Red Sea. He didn't even glance at the counter. His eyes were locked on Celeste. The triumphant smirk on Sharon's face had long since vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of bewilderment. "Who is that?" she whispered, a tremor of fear in her voice. Robert couldn't answer. He could only watch as the most powerful man in the company strode directly to the woman they had just tried to have arrested. The power dynamic in the gate area hadn't just shifted, it had been inverted with the force of a tectonic plate. The tiny kingdom that Sharon and Robert had ruled from behind their counter had just been vaporized, and they were standing in the epicenter of the blast. The phone call was over. The reckoning was about to begin. David Powell reached Celeste and stopped a respectful distance from her. The fury on his face instantly melted away, replaced by an expression of profound apology and concern. The shift was so jarring it was like watching a storm cloud instantly dissipate to reveal a clear sky. "Celeste," he said, his voice rich and full of genuine remorse. "I am so sorry. I came as soon as I got your call. Are you all right?" Celeste gave a soul-weary nod. "I'm fine, David. A little frustrated, but fine." Frustrated is the understatement of the century, he replied, his eyes briefly flashing with anger as he glanced towards the gate counter. What they put you through is unforgivable. He turned back to her. Please allow me to escort you onto the plane. We'll hold the flight as long as you need. Thank you, David. But before I go anywhere, I believe we need to address the root of the problem, Celeste said, her calm voice carrying in the silent terminal. She turned her head slightly, her gaze falling upon the two frozen figures of Robert and Sharon. It was only then that David Powell seemed to acknowledge their existence. He turned, and the thundercloud returned darker and more menacing than before. He strode to the counter, his executive team fanning out behind him, creating an impenetrable wall. The passengers who were still waiting to board watched phones now held up openly recording every second of the unfolding drama. Daniel Chen stood in the front row, his own phone capturing the scene with a steady hand. David Powell stared at Robert Peterson, his eyes like chips of ice. Robert seemed to shrink under the weight of his gaze. You are Robert Peterson? David asked, his voice dangerously low. Yes, sir. Mr. Powell, sir. Robert stammered, his entire body trembling. There seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding. There has been no misunderstanding. David snapped, his voice echoing in the concourse. I've been on the phone with my operations director for the last 10 minutes. I have a verbatim account of your conduct. You supported your agent in harassing a passenger. You ignored clear evidence of her identity and ticketing. You escalated the situation by being condescending and dismissive, and you capped off your spectacular failure in management by attempting to have one of our most important stakeholders removed by security. Is that an accurate summary? Robert's face was ashen. He could only manage a pathetic squeaking noise that might have been a yes. David then turned his withering gaze to Sharon, who looked as if she were about to faint. Her face, which had been red with anger just minutes before, was now a ghastly white. And you, David, said his voice dripping with contempt. Sharon Pickett. You are the one who initiated this. You, with your disgusting prejudiced assumptions. You who decided that a black woman in a cashmere suit couldn't possibly belong in Suite 1A. No, the system. It was a security flag. Sharon cried, her voice cracking. It was a desperate, last-ditch lie. Don't you dare lie to me, David roared, slamming his hand down on the counter. The sound cracked through the terminal like a gunshot. Sharon jumped, letting out a small scream. I had our head of IT pull the logs for this gate for the last hour. There was no security flag on Dr. Marigny's ticket. Not a single one. The only flag was in your own narrow, bigoted mind. You invented a reason to harass her. He let the accusation hang in the air for a full 10 seconds, allowing everyone to absorb its weight. He then lowered his voice, but it lost none of its intensity. Perhaps you two are unaware of who you have just insulted. David said, turning his body slightly, so he was addressing not just them, but the entire audience of passengers and airport staff. He gestured towards Celeste, who stood watching with a detached, almost clinical observation. This is Dr. Celeste Marigny. He announced, his voice ringing with pride and fury. Dr. Marigny is a brilliant scientist, an innovator, and the founder and CEO of Nexus Orbital. But she is much more than that to this company. When Aurafly was on the verge of collapse last year, when thousands of you... He swept his hand to indicate the other employees in Aurafly uniforms were about to lose your jobs. It was Dr. Marigny and her firm that stepped in. It was her capital, her belief in our potential that saved this airline. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. She is not just a passenger. She is not just an investor. Dr. Celeste Marigny is the co-owner of this airline. She sits on the board of directors. Her firm holds the largest single share of Airline. Every single one of your paychecks. He pointed a finger that trembled with rage at Sharon, and Robert is signed, figuratively speaking, by her. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The reality of the situation crashed down upon everyone. The gate agent hadn't just been rude to a passenger. She had tried to kick the Queen out of her own castle. Robert Peterson looked like he was having a heart attack, his hand clutching his chest. Sharon Pickett simply stared her mind, unable to process the cataclysmic scale of her error. The woman she had dismissed, insulted, and tried to have removed was, for all practical purposes, her ultimate boss. David Powell let the stunned silence linger for a moment longer before he turned back to the disgraced employees. The time for revelations was over. The time for consequences had arrived. With the truth laid bare for all to see, the atmosphere at Gate C-28 crackled with a tension that was thicker than the jet fuel fumes on the tarmac. The public unveiling of Celeste's identity was the lightning. Now came the thunder. David Powell looked at Sharon and Robert, his expression devoid of any sympathy. He had transformed from a corporate executive into an instrument of pure, unadulterated justice. Airline has a code of conduct. He began, his voice now cold and methodical, like a judge reading a verdict. It's in the employee handbook that you both signed. It speaks of dignity, respect, and unparalleled customer service. It forms the very core of the brand we are trying to build, a brand that Dr. Marigny herself helped to define when she agreed to invest in us. Today you have not just violated that code, you have taken a torch to it. He turned first to Robert. Mr. Peterson, as a manager, your primary duty is to de-escalate situations, to solve problems, and to lead by example. Instead, you did the opposite. You blindly trusted a subordinate's prejudiced report, you refused to listen to the passenger, and you used your authority not as a shield for the company, but as a weapon against a customer. You are the embodiment of failed leadership. Your employment with Airline Airlines is terminated, effective immediately. Robert staggered back as if he'd been physically struck. Mr. Powell, please. I have a family. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. A mistake is spilling coffee on a passenger's jacket. David cut him off, his voice merciless. What you did was a catastrophic failure of judgment and character. Our executive security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. You will then be escorted off the premises. You are not to have any further contact with any Airline employee. One of the security men in a dark suit stepped forward and stood beside the now sobbing Robert Peterson, who seemed to have aged 20 years in as many minutes. Then David Powell turned to Sharon. Her face was a mask of disbelief, her mind still refusing to accept the reality of her situation. She looked at him with wide, pleading eyes. "And you, Miss Pickett," David said, his voice dropping even lower. "You were the genesis of this entire ugly affair. You abused your position. You lied about company protocol. You engaged in discriminatory behavior that has caused immense damage to our brand and profound insult to a woman to whom we all owe a debt of gratitude. Your actions were not just unprofessional, they were despicable." Sharon finally found her voice, a high-pitched, desperate wail. I was just following procedure. I thought it was fraud. I have a perfect record. Your record is irrelevant, David said flatly, and your lies have run out. We have dozens of witnesses here. We have a video recording. He nodded briefly toward Daniel Chen, who lowered his phone, and most importantly, we have the testimony of Dr. Marigny. You are a liability this company can no longer afford. Your employment is also terminated, effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. Sharon crumpled against the counter, all the fight gone out of her, replaced by a wave of crushing despair. Please, she wept. Don't do this. I'll apologize. I'm so sorry. Your apology is worthless because it is born of consequence, not remorse. Celeste spoke for the first time since the confrontation began. Her voice was not triumphant or angry. It was filled with a profound sense of disappointment. You are not sorry for what you did, Miss Pickett. You are only sorry that you did it to me. That final devastating truth silenced Sharon's protests. The second security officer stepped forward and gently but firmly took her arm. Ma'am, you need to come with us. As the two disgraced employees were led away through the stunned crowd, a smattering of applause broke out among the passengers. It was a spontaneous, cathartic release of the tension that had gripped them all. They had witnessed an act of injustice, and they had just seen it met with immediate and proportional consequences. David Powell then turned to face the remaining passengers. He took the microphone from the gate counter. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed over the PA system clear and resolute. On behalf of Aurafly Airlines, I want to offer my deepest and most sincere apologies for what you have just witnessed and for the delay this has caused. The behavior of those two individuals is not what this airline stands for. It is not what we will ever stand for. We believe in respect for all people, and we have failed in that mission today. He looked directly at Celeste. And to Dr. Marigny, I apologize again publicly. We are honored to have you as a passenger and as a partner. What happened to you today is a stain on our company, and I give you my personal guarantee that I will do everything in my power to ensure nothing like this ever happens again. He then turned to the remaining gate staff, who had been watching in horrified silence. Get these passengers boarded. Upgrade every single passenger from this flight who wishes it to Economy Plus on the house. And get me the manifest. I want to personally call everyone in business and first class to apologize. With that, he walked over to Celeste. Dr. Marigny, he said softly. May I personally show you to your seat? Celeste finally allowed a small smile to grace her lips. Thank you, David. I'd like that. As the CEO of Aurafly Airlines personally picked up her carry-on bag and escorted Dr. Celeste Marigny down the jet bridge, the passengers finally began to board their conversations, buzzing with the incredible real-life drama they had just seen. Karma, they whispered to each other, was sometimes delivered not by a lightning bolt from the heavens, but by a quiet phone call from the co-owner of the airline. The interior of the Aurafly first-class cabin was an oasis of quiet luxury, all muted tones, soft lighting and polished wood veneers. The flight attendants who had been briefed on the situation by a frantic call from the head of in-flight services greeted Celeste with a level of deference usually reserved for royalty. Susan, the lead flight attendant, showed her to Suite 1A, a spacious enclosure with a reclining seat that converted into a fully flat bed, a personal minibar, and a large entertainment screen. Dr. Marigny Susan said, her voice filled with professional warmth and genuine apology. Welcome aboard. On behalf of the entire cabin crew, we are so terribly sorry for your experience at the gate. Please let me know if there is anything at all we can do to make your flight more comfortable. Thank you, Susan. It wasn't your fault, Celeste replied kindly, appreciating the woman's sincerity. David Powell placed her bag in the overhead compartment and then took the seat opposite her. The cabin doors were closed, and the plane began its slow pushback from the gate. The firings were necessary, David Celeste said, preempting his question. But they are not sufficient. I know he sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. This isn't about 2 bad employees, is it? It's a cultural problem, a systemic one. Exactly, Celeste confirmed. Sharon didn't manifest her prejudice in a vacuum. She felt empowered to act that way. Robert felt it was safer to protect her than to protect a customer. That tells me the training is inadequate, the oversight is lacking, and the corporate culture doesn't truly value the principles you espouse in your press releases. She looked out the window as the plane taxied towards the runway. When I invested in Airline, it wasn't just to make a profit. I saw a chance to build something better. An airline that leads not just in efficiency and comfort, but in human decency. Today showed me how far we have to go. David nodded, listening intently. What do you want to do? I'll authorize anything. A complete overhaul of our training programs. A new diversity and inclusion initiative. Just tell me what you need. All of that and more, Celeste said. I want to create the Airline Promise, a public-facing passenger bill of rights. I want a complete third-party audit of our hiring and promotion practices. I want to implement a new mandatory training module for all customer-facing employees, developed by a top-tier firm like the Kennedy Institute, focusing on implicit bias and de-escalation. And I want to create a direct anonymous reporting system for employees and passengers to flag discriminatory behavior that goes straight to a dedicated oversight committee on the board, a committee that I will personally chair. David didn't hesitate. Done, he said. Consider it done. I'll have the executive team draft the directives by the time we land in London. As the powerful engines of the Airbus A350 spooled up for takeoff, Celeste felt the anger and frustration she had been holding finally begin to recede, replaced by a sense of purpose. The incident had been ugly and humiliating, but it had also been a gift. It had exposed a deep flaw in the system she had invested in, a flaw she now had the power to fix. The story of what happened at Gate C-28 did not end when the plane took off. Daniel Chen, the young lawyer who had witnessed it all, posted his video to social media. By the time Flight 815 was over the Atlantic, the video had millions of views. The hashtags #Airline Promise and #Justice for de Marigny were trending worldwide. The story was picked up by major news outlets who praised Airline's swift and decisive action in firing the employees and the CEO's public apology. The company's stock, instead of falling, actually rose in the following days as investors and the public responded positively to the radical transparency and commitment to change. For Sharon Pickett and Robert Peterson, the karma was devastatingly complete. The video made them infamous. They became unemployable in the airline industry, and beyond their names, synonymous with corporate bigotry. They faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale of what happens when you abuse your small power and underestimate the person standing in front of you. Weeks later, Celeste sat in the Airline boardroom, not as a passenger, but as its co-owner and chair of the new oversight committee. She was reviewing the initial data from the new training programs. The reports were promising. Employee morale was up. The new reporting system had already identified and addressed several smaller issues before they could escalate. She hadn't just won a battle at a boarding gate. She had leveraged a moment of injustice into a catalyst for fundamental systemic change, making the company stronger, better, and more humane. It was a testament to her belief that the best way to fix a flawed system wasn't just to punish its actors, but to rewrite its code. The story of Dr. Celeste Marigny isn't just about the epic satisfaction of watching a bully get what they deserve. It's a powerful reminder that dignity and respect are not privileges to be granted based on someone's appearance, but fundamental rights. It shows how one person armed with composure, intelligence, and yes, power, can turn a moment of personal humiliation into a force for widespread positive change. We've all seen or experienced moments of injustice, big and small. We've all felt that sense of powerlessness. But this story proves that when people in positions of power have the courage to stand up and do the right thing, entire systems can be transformed for the better. What did you think of Sharon's and Robert's instant karma? Have you ever witnessed a moment where someone's prejudice spectacularly backfired on them? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We love reading about justice being served. And if you enjoyed this story and want more tales of dramatic showdowns and karmic justice, be sure to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to you every week.